Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't.
1. Abductor digiti minimi, hand. Origin. Pisiform bone, pisohamate ligament, and flexor retinaculum. Insertion. Ulnar side of base of proximal phalanx of little finger and extensor expansion. Action. Abducts little finger at metacarpophalangeal joint. Nerve deep branch of ulnar nerve, C8, T1. 2. Abductor pollicis brevis. Origin. Tubercle of scaphoid and flexor retinaculum. Insertion. Radial sesamoid of proximal phalanx of thumb and tendon of extensor pollicis longus. Action. Abducts thumb at metacarpophalangeal and carpometacarpal joints. Nerve recurrent, muscular, branch of median nerve, C8, T1, occasionally by ulnar nerve. 3. Abductor pollicis longus. Origin. Upper posterior surface of ulna and middle third of posterior surface of radius and interosseous membrane between. Insertion. Over tendons of radial extensors and brachioradialis to base of first metacarpal and trapezium. Action. Abducts and extends thumb at carpometacarpal joint. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C6, 7. 4. Adductor pollicis. Origin. Oblique head, base of second and third metacarpals, trapezoid and capitate. Transverse head, palmar border and shaft of third metacarpal. Insertion. Ulnar sesamoid then ulnar side of base of proximal phalanx and tendon of extensor pollicis longus. Action. Adducts carpometacarpal joint of thumb. Nerve. Deep branch of ulnar nerve, T1. 5. Anconeus. Origin. Smooth surface at lower extremity of posterior aspect of lateral epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Lateral side of olecranon. Action. Weak extensor of elbow. Moves, abducts, ulna in pronation. Nerve. Radial nerve, C7, 8. 6. Articularis cubiti. Origin. Deep distal surface of medial head of triceps. Insertion. Posterior capsule of elbow joint. Action. Lifts capsule away from joint. Nerve. Radial, C6, 7, 8. 7. Biceps brachii. Origin. Long head supraglenoid tubercle of scapula. Short head, coracoid process of scapula with coracobrachialis. Insertion. Posterior border of bicipedal tuberosity of radius, over bursa, and bicipedal aponeurosis to deep fascia and subcutaneous ulna. Action. Supinates forearm, flexes elbow, weakly flexes shoulder. Nerve. Musculocutaneous nerve, C5, 6, from lateral cord. 8. Brachialis. Origin. Anterior lower half of humerus and medial and lateral intermuscular septa. Insertion. Coronoid process and tuberosity of ulna. Action. Flexes elbow. Nerve. Musculocutaneous nerve, C5, 6, from lateral cord. Also small supply from radial nerve, C7. 9. Brachioradialis. Origin. Upper 2/3 of lateral supracondylar ridge of humerus and lateral intermuscular septum. Insertion. Base of styloid process of radius. Action. Flexes arm at elbow and brings forearm into mid-prone position. Nerve. Radial nerve, C5, 6. 10. Coracobrachialis. Origin. Coracoid process of scapula with biceps brachii. Insertion. Upper half medial border of humerus. Action. Flexes and weakly adducts arm. Nerve. Musculocutaneous nerve, C5, 6, 7, from lateral cord. 11. Extensor carpi radialis brevis. Origin. Common extensor origin on anterior aspect of lateral epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Posterior base of third metacarpal. Action. Extends and abducts hand at wrist. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 12 extensor carpi radialis longus. Origin. Lower third of lateral supracondylar ridge of humerus and lateral intermuscular septum. Insertion. Posterior base of second metacarpal. Action. Extends and abducts hand at wrist. Nerve. Radial nerve, C6, 7. 13 extensor carpi ulnaris. Origin. Common extensor origin on anterior aspect of lateral epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Base of fifth metacarpal via groove by ulnar styloid. Action. Extends and adducts hand at wrist. Nerve. Posterior interosseous. 14 extensor digiti minimi. Origin. Common extensor origin on anterior aspect of lateral epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Extensor expansion of little finger, usually two tendons which are joined by a slip from extensor digitorum at metacarpophalangeal joint. Action. Extends all joints of little finger. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 15 extensor digitorum. Origin. 554R4R common extensor origin on anterior aspect of lateral epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. External expansion to middle and distal phalanges by four tendons. Tendons 3 and 4 usually fuse and little finger just receives a slip. Action. Extends all joints of fingers. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 16 extensor indicis. Origin. Lower posterior shaft of ulna, below extensor pollicis longus, and adjacent interosseous membrane. Insertion. Extensor expansion of index finger, tendon lies on ulnar side of extensor digitorum tendon. Action. Extends all joints of index finger. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 17 extensor pollicis brevis. Origin. Lower third of posterior shaft of radius and adjacent interosseous membrane. Insertion. Over tendons of radial extensors and brachioradialis to base of proximal phalanx of thumb. Action. Extends metacarpophalangeal joint of thumb. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 18 extensor pollicis longus. Origin. Middle third of posterior ulna, below abductor pollicis longus, and adjacent interosseous membrane. Insertion. Base of distal phalanx of thumb via Lister's tubercle, dorsal tubercle of radius. Action. Extends interphalangeal and metacarpophalangeal joints of thumb. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 19 flexor carpi radialis. Origin. Common flexor origin of medial epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Bases of second and third metacarpals via groove in trapezium and slip to scaphoid action. Flexes and abducts wrist. Nerve. Median nerve, from medial and lateral cords. 20 flexor carpi ulnaris. Origin. Humeral head, common flexor origin of medial epicondyle. Ulnar head, aponeurosis from medial olecranon and upper 3/4 subcutaneous border of ulna. Insertion. Pisiform, hook of hamate, base of fifth metacarpal via pisohamate and pisometacarpal ligaments. Action. Flexes and adducts wrist. Fixes pisiform during action of hypothenar muscles. Nerve. Ulnar nerve, C8, T1, with some C7 by communication from lateral cord. 21 flexor digiti minimi brevis. Origin. Flexor retinaculum and hook of hamate. Insertion. Ulnar side of base of proximal phalanx of little finger. Action. Flexes metacarpophalangeal joint of little finger nerve. Deep branch of ulnar nerve, C8, T1. 22 Flexor digitorum profundus origin. Medial olecranon, upper 3/4 of anterior and medial surface of ulna as far round as subcutaneous border and narrow strip of interosseous membrane. Insertion. Distal phalanges of medial forefingers. Tendon to index finger separates early. Action. Flexes distal interphalangeal joints, then secondarily flexes proximal interphalangeal and metacarpophalangeal joints and wrist. Nerve. Median nerve, anterior interosseous, and ulnar nerve. 23 Flexor digitorum superficialis. Origin. Humeral head, common flexor origin of medial epicondyle humerus, medial ligament of elbow. Ulnar head, medial border of coronoid process and fibrous arch radial head, whole length of anterior oblique line. Insertion. Tendons split to insert onto sides of middle phalanges of medial forefingers. Action. Flexes proximal interphalangeal joints and secondarily metacarpophalangeal joints and wrist. Nerve. Median nerve, C7, 8, from medial and lateral cords. 24 Flexor pollicis brevis. Origin. Flexor retinaculum and tubercle of trapezium. Insertion. Base of proximal phalanx of thumb, via radial sesamoid. Action. Flexes metacarpophalangeal joint of thumb. Nerve. Recurrent, muscular, branch of median nerve, C8, T1, may also be from deep branch of ulnar nerve, T1. 25 Flexor pollicis longus. Origin. Anterior surface of radius below anterior oblique line and adjacent interosseous membrane. Insertion. Base of distal phalanx of thumb. Action. Flexes distal phalanx of thumb. Nerve. Anterior interosseous nerve, C7, 8. 26 Infraspinatus. Origin. Medial 3/4 of infraspinous fossa of scapula and fibrous intermuscular septa. Insertion. Middle facet of greater tuberosity of humerus and capsule of shoulder joint. Action. Laterally rotates arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Suprascapular nerve, C5, 6, from upper trunk. 27 Dorsal interossei. Origin. Bipinnate from inner aspects of shafts of all metacarpals. Insertion. Proximal phalanges and dorsal extensor expansion on radial side of index and middle fingers and ulnar side of middle and ring fingers. Action. Abduct from axis of middle finger. Flex metacarpophalangeal joint while extending interphalangeal joints. Nerve. Deep branch of ulnar nerve, T1. 28 Palmar interossei. Origin. Anterior shafts of 2, 4, 5 metacarpals, unipennate. Insertion. Proximal phalanges and dorsal extensor expansion on ulnar side of index and radial side of ring and little fingers and to ulnar sesamoid of thumb. Action. Adduct to axis of middle finger. Flex metacarpophalangeal joint while extending interphalangeal joints. Nerve. Deep branch of ulnar nerve, T1. 29 Lumbricals. Origin. 4 tendons of flexor digitorum profundus. Radial 2, radial side only, unipennate. Ulnar 2, cleft between tendons, bipinnate. Insertion extensor expansion, dorsum of proximal phalanx, of fingers 2 to 5 radial side. Action. Flex metacarpophalangeal joints and extend interphalangeal joints of fingers. Nerve. Lateral 2, median nerve, C8, T1. Medial 2, deep branch of ulnar nerve, C8, T1. 30 Opponent digiti minimi hand. Origin. Flexor retinaculum and hook of hamate. Insertion. Ulnar border of shaft of 5th metacarpal. Action. Opposes, flexes and laterally rotates, carpometacarpal and metacarpophalangeal joints of little finger. Nerve. Deep branch of ulnar nerve, C8, T1. 31 opponent pollicis. Origin. Flexor retinaculum and tubercle of trapezium. Insertion. Whole of radial border of first metacarpal. Action. Opposes, medially rotates and flexes, carpometacarpal and metacarpophalangeal joints of thumb. Nerve. Recurrent, muscular, branch of median nerve, C8T1, may also be from deep branch of ulnar nerve, T1. 32 Palmaris brevis. Origin. Flexor retinaculum and palmar aponeurosis. Insertion. Skin of palm into dermis. Action. Steadies and corrugates skin of palm to help with grip. Nerve. Superficial branch of ulnar nerve, C8, T1. 33 Palmaris longus. Origin. Common flexor origin of medial epicondyle of humerus. Insertion. Flexor retinaculum and palmar aponeurosis. Action. Flexes wrist and tenses palmar aponeurosis. Nerve. Median nerve, C7, 8, from medial and lateral cords. 34 Pectoralis major. Origin. Clavicular head medial half clavicle. Sternocostal head lateral manubrium and sternum, 6 upper costal cartilages and external oblique aponeurosis. Insertion. Lateral lip of bicipedal groove of humerus and anterior lip of deltoid tuberosity. Action. Clavicular head flexes and adducts arm. Sternal head, adducts and medially rotates arm. Accessory for inspiration. Nerve. Medial pectoral nerve, from medial cord, and lateral pectoral nerve, from lateral cord, C6, 7, 8. 35 Pectoralis minor. Origin. 3, 4, 5 ribs. Insertion. Medial and upper surface of coracoid process of scapula. Action. Elevates ribs if scapula fixed, protracts scapula, assists serratus anterior. Nerve. Medial pectoral nerve, C8, T1, from medial cord. 36 Pronator quadratus. Origin. Lower quarter of anteromedial shaft of ulna. Insertion. Lower quarter of anterolateral shaft of radius and some interosseous membrane. Action. Pronates forearm and maintains ulna and radius opposed. Nerve. Anterior interosseous nerve, C8. 37 Pronator teres. Origin. Humeral head, medial epicondyle, medial supracondylar ridge and medial intermuscular septum. Ulnar head, medial border of coronoid process. Insertion. Just posterior to most prominent part of lateral convexity of radius. Action. Pronates forearm and flexes elbow. Nerve. Median nerve, C6, 7, from lateral and medial cords. 38 serratus anterior. Origin. Upper 8 ribs and anterior intercostal membranes from midclavicular line. Lower 4 interdigitating with external oblique. Insertion. Intermedial border scapula. 1 and 2, upper angle, 3 and 4, length of costal surface, 5 to 8, inferior angle. Action. Laterally rotates and protracts scapula. Nerve. Long thoracic nerve, C5, 6, 7, from roots, slips from ribs 1 and 2, C5, 3 and 4, C6, 5 to 8, C7. 39 Subscapularis. Origin. Medial 2/3 of subscapular fossa. Insertion. Lesser tuberosity of humerus, upper medial lip of bicipedal groove, capsule of shoulder joint. Action. Medially rotates arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Upper and lower subscapular nerves, C5, 6, from posterior cord. 40 Supinator. Origin. Deep part, horizontal supinator crest and fossa of ulna. Superficial part, downwards lateral epicondyle and lateral ligament of elbow and annular ligament. Insertion. Neck and shaft of radius, between anterior and posterior oblique lines. Action. Supinates forearm. Only acts alone when elbow extended. Nerve. Posterior interosseous nerve, C5, 6. 41 supraspinatus. Origin. Medial 3/4 of supraspinous fossa of scapula, upper surface of spine, bipinnate. Insertion. Superior facet on greater tuberosity of humerus and capsule of shoulder joint. Action abducts arm and stabilizes shoulder joint. Nerve. Suprascapular nerve, C5, 6, from upper trunk. 42 riceps. Origin. Long head, infraglenoid tubercle of scapula. Lateral head, upper half posterior humerus, linear origin. Medial head, lies deep on lower half posterior humerus inferomedial to spiral groove and both intermuscular septa. Insertion. Posterior part of upper surface of olecranon process of ulna and posterior capsule. Action. Extends elbow. Long head stabilizes shoulder joint. Medial head retracts capsule of elbow joint on extension. Nerve. Radial nerve, C7, 8, from posterior cord, 4 branches.